I hereby call to order this meeting of the District 200 School Board. Mrs. Hutchinson, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Crabtree?
Here.
Mrs. Erickson?
Here.
Mr. Gambiani?
Here.
Mr. Hanlon?
Here.
Mr. Matheson is absent. Mr. Paulson?
Here.
Mr. Vroman?
Here. Mrs. Crabtree, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Crabtree. I'm going to ask for a motion and a second to suspend the rules and adjourn to the workshop session.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Crabtree, seconded by Mr. Hanlon. Mrs. Hutchinson, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Crabtree?
Yes.
Mr. Hanlon?
Yes.
Mrs. Erickson?
Yes.
Mr. Gambiani?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson?
Yes.
Mr. Vroman?
Yes. The motion to adjourn and go to a workshop setting is passed. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Vroman. So we have really two topics, but they're very related this evening, and that and this is pretty consistent with kind of the board's typical calendar. That this is the meeting where you see the 5-year financial projections. Just a couple of comments that I want to make to set, I think, a context for the discussion tonight. Number one is just very clearly. But since a couple of you are new to the 5-year projection piece, there are no decisions to be made tonight. This is not the presentation of the 5-year financial forecast is really intended to give you, I guess, kind of what I would call a temperature read on where we are as we're projecting forward. This is a launch into the budget development process for the fiscal 19 budget and intended to try to pull together as many data points as we already know, combined with some that we've still made some projections around to kind of give you a read for as we're heading into the budget year, what's kind of the temperature of where we stand, both in the upcoming budget year and then obviously projecting out for the 4 years that follow that. As with any set of projections, certainly the further you get out from this year, that being the base year, the more that those really are projections, because you're dealing with some data variables that you don't know, but again, this is really intended to kind of launch that conversation. And so that's one of the reasons why we kind of bring this to you for the first time at the meeting, is that we really want you to kind of see the full context of the presentation. So Bill's going to guide us through the presentation of this. The Finance Committee did meet and reviewed some of the data input elements. So really anything that we had to make a projection around, Jim and the Finance Committee kind of helped us to look through and affirm that I think we're in kind of as I guess the projections are as honest of a projection as they can be at this point in time. So I'm going to hand it over to Bill, let Bill kind of walk you all the way through the presentation. I do think this is one where it's helpful to kind of see the whole thing, take whatever notes you want as you're going through, and then at the end we'll come back and kind of pick up any questions you have, and then really kind of tie the projections into the second item on the agenda, which is the discussion on where we are in terms of facility planning and your goal around facility planning. So, Bill, I won't steal any more of your thunder. I'll hand it over to you and let you go.
Thank you, Dr. Schuler. As Dr. Schuler mentioned, this is the time of year where we do our 5-year forecast, and we've used this planning tool for a number of years. It used to be called the FPP, Financial Profile Plan, and now it's called FiveCast. Forecast 5 is a group we work with. They're a subgroup of PMA and have worked to enhance and develop this over time. But the district was one of the first districts to start using this plan. And this just, I'm not going to go through each bullet, but this lays out some of the information and some of the advantages of using this model and some of the things that we as a school district use it. for. We do update it constantly. We do use it to look at what ifs and those type of situations. Helps us with budget and performance analysis. And as the system has grown, we're able to upload our whole accounting system and general ledger system into this model. And it helps with our budget distribution, and we can put reports on it. We've used some of those reports when we've done the budget. The budget presentation last year had a number of different new models that were pulled directly from this that we put into our budget plan. So it's an ever-changing and upgraded model. The model did have to be upgraded this year with the new evidence-based funding, so that was there was a little bit of a delay as they updated that as the law changed, and I'll talk a little bit about the impact of the school district as they get to that point. The system we upload, and we have 5 years of audited annual financial reports, revenues, expenditures, and balances. As I mentioned, we upload our current budget, which is really the base year for this entire model. So as we look through it, that's really the jumping off point, and then we look at 5 years moving out, with the current fiscal year being the year that is considered our base year. We input all the tax levy extension rate information, the equalized assessed valuation, or the property wealth of the school district. We also look at enrollment. We just updated our CUSD report, so there's some enrollment aspects to this as well. And then last and most importantly is the district assumptions that we do. And as Dr. Schuler mentioned, we had a great finance committee meeting. I really appreciate the input and perspective that both Mr. Gambiani and Mr. Matheson bring to this. We have had a great conversation, talked about those assumptions, added some detail to the report to make sure that it was clear to all. So I look at this all the time, so it's great to have a second and third set of eyes look at it as well from the board level. And so our finance committee spent a great deal of time talking about this, so this is the end result. I'm going to start off, as I mentioned, this fiscal year that we're currently in is our base year, and this is just a chart that illustrates what our operating budget is. It's the education, O&M, transportation, working cash fund of the school district. We exclude the IMRF budget in this model just because our board fund balance policy, which we'll talk about in a little bit greater detail as we get towards the end of this, doesn't incorporate the IMRF budget, but just a footnote there that the IMRF budget will be listed on the revenues and expenditures for the program below this chart, just so you're aware of what it is. The IMRF fund is balanced, as you're aware, so that this just shows you where our starting point is from the operating side for our budget. The first big assumption that we look at, and it's one that we track throughout the year, the board's aware that we're constantly monitoring the state of the consumer price index, because when the property tax cap laws went into place, the CPI was the main driver for that. As the board is aware, it is the increment that we use that we can levy for year over year, and we do track it each year. Everything you see on the green side is what is a known number. We just found out the January 2018 number came in actually identical to what we had in 2017. The Department of Labor released that in January 12th, I believe it was. So we just found out that number stayed pretty static. And going out for the next 5 years, we haven't levied for 18 yet, but we've got the 2.1 for 18, and then going out, we're using a 2% increment, and we will continue to update that each year as we know the new numbers and adjust as necessary, but we're using a 2% increment for consumer price index. That's the first assumption on the local revenue side. The other thing, and this is obviously is an unknown to the school district, especially at the time we levy, is what our new property wealth will be in the district. It's taxed outside of the cap when new growth comes onto the tax rolls, so everything again you see in green is a known number. Even though the board levied in December for the 2017 levy, we still do not know what that new growth is, and that's again why we levy an amount greater than the CPI to make sure we capture that new property as it comes on the tax rolls. As you can see in 2016, that number spiked up quite a bit. It was the impact of TIF 1 in Wheaton expiring, as well as a smaller TIF in Carroll Stream expiring. So that number came in almost exactly to the number we had forecasted, so that was a good thing. You'll see 2017, while still unknown, we have a spike in there, and that is related to the Amazon property coming online. Duke Realty turned the building over August 1st to Amazon, and they put in shelves and got people working right away. So we still haven't heard if it's going to be fully assessed for the year, but we're anticipating it will be. So we have that spike for the new growth related to the Amazon building. You'll see the next 4 years we do have it's set at about a static $25 million number. That's again just an estimate and an assumption we're using. We are seeing a lot of growth in the district. There are a lot of properties that we are monitoring that are coming onto the tax roll. Some of those will be in TIFs, some of those will be not, or will not be. So as those new properties come on, we'll continue to monitor and update that number. But for right now, we're at 25 million for the 2018 through 2021. 2022 is the next TIF that expires, and that is TIF 2, which is a good portion of downtown Wheaton. And the EAV growth in that TIF continues to go up quite a bit. So we currently have a number based on the current new growth in that district, and we will continue to monitor that as well. But that's a significant impact to the school district when that TIF expires as well. There is a third TIF in Wheaton that is not set to expire, I think, until 2028, so we've got a little time on that. Carroll Stream has an additional TIF that isn't set to expire for a while yet either. They could end it early. Carroll Stream does have a history of doing that, so we continue to work with all the local municipalities on the TIFs. And then finally, Warrenville has a few TIFs that are still pretty far out. One that was just recently created, and one was created within the last 5 years. So those go 23 years, so we still have a lot of time. But again, everything in yellow is estimated right now, and it's part of our assumptions for new growth. Looking at other local revenue, the corporate personal property replacement tax, the board probably recalls this has been kind of a roller coaster with the state of Illinois. We used to receive about 2.2 million. That number dropped to about $1.8 million this year as they started redistributing some of those funds. There was a call that they had overpaid, but they've now forgiven that repayment. We talked about that at audit time, but we are keeping that flat moving out. That's one that is not known at this time, but we're going to leave it flat moving forward at the 1.8 million. But again, it's down over previous years. All other local revenue were projected at current FY18 budget levels. In the model last year, or in the budget this year, we had a $250,000 developer donations. As those accrue with local municipalities, we do call and collect that money. It is in the budget this year, but we don't get that amount every year, so we did reduce that out of the model because I won't say it's a one-time payment, but it only occurs at certain time points as the money accrues. But we anticipate if we see a lot of new property growth in the district that we could see something like that here in the near future as well. And then finally, where fees are assumed at our current level, but obviously the board is still in the process of reviewing that. So we've left that flat for now, and again, that's something we can update as we move forward. Always a fun slide when we get to state funding and what's going on there. As I mentioned at the beginning, the state had passed the evidence-based funding model, which changed the way districts are going to receive money from the state, both from a funding level as well as a receipt of money, funds from the state. They basically rolled about 5.4 million of what was categorical funding that we received on a quarterly basis into the monthly payments that we now receive from the state of Illinois. So our general state aid last year, as an example, was about 6.8 million. This year it's 12.5 million. We're receiving that on a monthly basis. That's good for cash flow, obviously, and timing, as that money is not money we have to really wait for anymore because it is coming in on a regular basis. So about 5.4 million of former categorical funding is included in that 12.5 million. When you look at the other state categorical grants, there's really not a lot left in categorical funding. There's driver's ed, which we're keeping pretty flat. And we're projecting moving forward at the current ISB level. When we budgeted, we didn't know what exactly the funding level was going to be, and probably the classic line item in this is the transportation. If you recall, we didn't receive a lot of transportation funding, regular transportation funding in the past. The state said they were going to more fully fund that. We hedged a little bit and increased our budget, but actually we received quite a bit more than they did stick to their promise to fully fund it. So our transportation funding, which was a couple $100,000 last year, and we budgeted about $560,000, went to about 1.1 million. Now, some of that is a function of our, as the board is aware, we bid that out, and with the need to hire drivers, the cost of transportation went up, so that's a factor that is involved as well. But that line item went up. We also saw an increase over our special ed tuition reimbursement as well. That was higher than budgeted. So we've reflected the model moving forward to start at those levels for state funding for those categorical funds. And that equates to about $7.3 million. Finally, the federal revenue, we're holding that flat at about $8 million where it currently sits. So again, that is something we continue to monitor as actions taken at the federal level and see how that impacts a lot of those federal funds that we receive, everything from title to Medicare to national school lunch reimbursement and those type items. So for the purpose of the model, our assumption is to keep that flat moving forward. Some interest sensitivity issues, as I talked about some of those items, especially at the local level. Every 1% of the CPI equates to about $1.3 million. So a CPI of a little over 2% is obviously around $2.6 million, $2.7 million roughly. Every $1 million of new property growth, it means about $46,000 of additional funds to the school district. Again, that's outside the property tax cap. And then finally, the tax collection rate, every 0.1%, because not everybody pays their taxes from time to time, obviously, but we're fortunate where we are that does not happen very often, but every 0.1% that we don't receive is about $132,000. One thing we are continuing to monitor is the rush to pay taxes that occurred in December. The county collected a lot of early tax revenue, and we're waiting to see how that could impact our budget, and when the state or when the county releases the tax money. Is there going to be some? Usually it's close to 50-50. We receive money in June and September. It's usually 49-51, 48-52. We're waiting to see how the impact of what 100, I don't remember the exact number DuPage pulled in, but I think it was well over 140 million or something like that. So they generally don't have that much money sitting there when the June taxes are paid out to school districts and other municipalities. So we're interested and we'll monitor to see how the county treasurer is going to handle those disbursements out to school districts. Finally, just want to talk a little bit about the categorical fundings. Each FY18, this fiscal year, every quarterly payment is estimated to be about $1.8 million. That number is obviously down quite a bit because we're receiving a lot of the money on time. That would be down more if not for the additional transportation and tuition money that we're receiving. Right now, we're hearing that we're going to be receiving one of our quarterly CATs here within the next couple of weeks, which is good news. So we're obviously going to monitor that and what the state comptroller is doing. I know that the overall backlog of bills has been cut in half through some bond financing the state did and some ability with the income tax increase to get greater cash flow at the state level. So we'll continue to keep the board monitored on that, but just a sensitivity number as far as what each categorical payment is now. One thing the model does not include is the receipt of the late FY17 categorical money. That in excess of 2.8 million. It was probably even closer to 3 million that we received at the end of after the end of our audit period. If we receive all 4 of our categorical payments and this 2.8 million, that obviously will be additional proceeds that the district receives. Every year there's always been some delay. We thought there'd be a better catch up with the state income tax, but we're still waiting to find out what's going to happen as far as all forecasts. Again, we capture the categoricals all the way through 60 days beyond the end of the fiscal year, which is part of our modified accrual audit. So we're waiting to see what's happening there. One other note, the House and Senate both overrode the Senate Bill 444 veto by the governor, so that hopefully will mean that we will find out relatively soon what our allocation is for the evidence-based funding level.
Just on that point, Bill, I read too that the veto was overridden by both chambers of the General Assembly, but the ISBE has asked for some even additional legislation to clear up some other tweaks. Do you have any sense of that going to impact us at all?
Yeah, I'm not, probably just in time, I would guess. I don't know that there's any, I haven't heard of anything substantial, but ISBE, as they work through and try and run these calculations, we originally were supposed to find out in January, that was February, and it's been delayed now by the veto that was placed on that Senate Bill 444. So I don't know that it'll be anything substantive other than it'll probably take more time. We had budgeted about a $300,000. That was the original estimate in our general state aid number for the impact of the evidence-based funding. As Dr. Schuler has mentioned before, we are right on the cusp of tier 2 and tier 3. I think tier 3 starts at 90%, and we're at 89 point something in our based on our estimates. So if we're in tier 2, there's potentially more money there. We've seen some recent emails from our local legislators that number for us may be more over $400,000. The impact of Senate Bill 444, the impact of what they're trying to fix was how some school districts had their local resources calculated, and it actually will lower that. So that means money will be redistributed, which means we could receive a little bit less money, but anything new, I don't know of anything substantive that could impact our overall funding level, but we're still, think we're going to be at least at our budget level, if not a little bit more. But again, they still haven't started distributing those funds to school districts yet either, so we'll wait and see. And I'm sure there's school districts in tier 1 that are very anxiously awaiting those proceeds.
Bill, before you leave revenue, expenditures are next. Yeah. The CPI number is equates to about $2.8 million roughly for us. Do we have any handle on what that would be like to the average home in terms of the impact of next year's tax bill?
It depends because home values are so varied. If it's, if you're a $300,000 home, you have $100,000 of, you're assessed at, and it's, you're paying $5,000, and your house goes up is the same as everybody else in the district. It should go up by that 2.1% over what it was prior year. And again, it depends on what your obviously the assessment to the school district.
We can't really pinpoint a dollar to the average median value home yet. I mean, we've had that conversation before. Maybe it was after this meeting in a separate meeting.
Yeah, I don't actually remember ever calculating that connected to the levy. We've done it around discussions with referendum because you're actually increasing the tax rate in order to collect that. So I think the other element that Linda mentioned is that, right, so as your new property from the previous year rolls in as well, that impacts the distribution. So it's hard to say what a 2% CPI would be.
Thank you for leading, Mr. Paulson. Moving to expenditure side. Again, this is the operating budget of the school district less the IMRF, but it's listed as a footnote there. And again, the board's seeing similar information when we did the budget. Moving to our key expenditure assumptions on salaries and staffing through the model, through the 5 years moving forward. For teachers, we have built in 2%, which is right near, obviously, close to the CPI that we're using moving forward. All other staff, we've got at 2% as well, and then at 1.5%. Our model for the purpose of staffing assumes that our staffing will remain flat moving forward, and obviously that's something that we continue to monitor as we move through the spring here, and as Dr. Radmer starts to look at staffing for the upcoming year and what our enrollment numbers are. And I think he's got his first meeting with the elementary principals coming up here in a couple of weeks. So obviously that's something at this point we're leaving it flat, but we will obviously continue to monitor it as we move through the end of the year here and get the preparations for the following fiscal year. Health and dental benefits, we've got a 3% increase built in moving forward. Our pool, our cooperative that we're in, saw a very small increase this year. We were a little higher because of our claims. We had a little bit of a rough claim year last year. This year has started off much better, and we're hoping to see that we fall within that range. But overall, that is the percentage that we've got moving forward. The cooperative is very proactive in trying to find ways to save the school district's money, and we're very appreciative of that. They're looking into a lot of things now, like telemedicine and other things to try and look at ways to save money and some wellness things. So we continue to be active participants in that process, using that 3% for annual increases moving forward on health and dental. Purchase services in supplies, capital outlay, and tuition. We have 2% annual increases built into the education fund for everything with the exception of tuition. That's always an unknown, and I know Dr. Panopoulos works very hard to keep that tuition, those tuition costs down and tempered each year, but obviously there is a bit of an unknown as we move forward. On our operations and maintenance side, we have 1% annual increases in all of these line items, and I'll talk, except for capital outlay, and I'll talk about that a little more. And then finally, transportation, we have the 2% built in overall for our purchase services, supplies, capital spend. Speaking to O&M, specifically back to capital, we will be increasing, put into the model, 3.2 million of capital spend in FY19. That's over the 2.4 million we spent this year. That number is really a lot of the priority one, and we'll talk a little bit more about that probably in the next conversation. But that's what is left as priority one, non-Jefferson priority one, year one items. And Mr. Robinson has been working diligently with our staff and architects to look at some of those projects, and we've the board approved part of that at the last meeting for Wheaton North and some other schools that to get some of that work going, and the board will start to see the bids for that work come here in the spring. We always like to get out early ahead of the crowd, and so we're working on those items. Then moving forward after FY19 in the model, we've moved the the FY20 budget up to the Sherman Durgis allocation, which is at 7.3 million budget, and then moving ahead, we've got it moving at about 300,000 annually above that. Thereafter, that's about what Sherman Durgis moves up each year. Last year when I gave this presentation, we had illustrated to the board what that would look like as far as our overall spend. We're going to the full Sherman Durgis, so this shouldn't look too new, but it's obviously going from 3.2 million to 7.3 million is a big leap in expenditure. So we have that built into the model.
Hey Doug, get back to that last one. Can you clarify what the tuition is?
Tuition is, there's special ed tuition, which is for outplaced students that we send out of district that we can't service in district, as well as our TCD students that attend the vocational educational school over in Addison. We send students for both of our high schools, but the majority of that tuition line item is for outplaced students. Moving to capital spending, we also, this is a placeholder that we put into the model. Obviously, the finance committee, we talked about this for a while in our discussions, and we obviously are going to talk further. And again, this is a placeholder. I think there's a lot of discussion to still occur about what we want to do as far as transfer of fund balance. But we've included a 1 million transfer of fund balance in FY18. I'm going to skip to the second bullet. In FY18, and that's if the board approves the lease agreement at the next meeting, then we need to start paying some architect fees. So that's part of that cost or part of that transfer. I don't think it'll be near that amount, but we'll adjust accordingly. And then we've got 4 million in FY19 for Jefferson and secure entries, and then if needed, in 1 million in FY20. So That's what we've laid out again as a placeholder for fund balance transfers, but again, the finance committee obviously wants to talk more about that, and we'll look at all the factors that, fund balance impacts, as well as our fund balance policy and such. Going back up to the top a little bit, I skipped over, we also have included in the model the 1 million annual transfer of operating revenue to start covering the lease payments in FY19. Again, that's something that's still a work in progress as we move forward with the Early Childhood Center process, but that would be the amount that we're using right now in our assumptions as far as the lease payment would go, that we would use, set aside that operating revenue to pay for that lease. Additional assumptions, no legislative changes in school funding. Obviously, there was a big one last year, but we are still waiting, obviously waiting to see if there's any other ways schools are funded, anything changes there. No change to the tax cap laws. Also, these are all discussion points that have been discussed or have been brought up for years. The possible pension shift of the TRS. About every 0.5% is about $450,000 to the district. The numbers stayed relatively consistent, but that is yet to be seen. There's been different variations and discussions about it, but we haven't heard anything about that lately. Also includes known and projected retirements in future years. We have a pretty good idea what our retirement is going to be for this fiscal year. That'll impact next year's budget. Going out, we don't have as much advance notice as we used to, so we have to do some estimating there. So we've got some estimates built into the model of 10 to 12 staff, teaching staff a year going out. I think we're about at that number this year overall. Generally, we've got those teachers, we're replacing those teachers with salary coming in at $50,000. We don't go down to VA1 or the first entry level, because we do have specialists that leave, and some of those have masters required, so we try and average that out for what our starting salaries will be. So we have those new teachers brought back into the model at about $50,000. And then finally, as I mentioned, our fiscal year 18 budget is our base year, and that is assumed to be accurate for the purpose of the projections as well. So what does this all look like? I know it's small numbers again, hopefully everybody's got a copy of it. But what you see in front of you is, as we, just some highlights of what I went through. You can see in the top part of the graph, you see that red -$1 million, that's the lease transfer payment going out of revenues. And then you can see that's the total revenue, and then the total expenditures for the overall operating budget are shown. So if you look at FY19, with the transfers out and anticipated revenues and expenditure, we're anticipating a positive year-end operating budget for that fiscal year. Below that line, you can see another red number. Those are, again, the fund balance transfers that we spoke about, and then it shows what it takes that number versus the surplus. The budget, for the purpose of an operating budget, would still be balanced, but we have some fund balance transfer in there as well to the capital projects fund, and again, are those placeholders. And then you'll see what our fund balance is overall, and then at the very bottom, as the fund balance as a percentage of revenues, you can see where we are. We're going to end the year assuming right around 30%, and then as we transfer some of that fund balance, that number goes down. Skipping up to FY20, you'll see again the lease payments in there, but then you'll see quite an increase in the expenditures, and that's directly related to the impact of Sherman-Durgis, and that obviously throws the budget, operating budget, into a negative situation. It's again not too different from what we saw last year when we looked at that Sherman-Durgis, but obviously bumping that amount up will create a negative situation. That's something that the board will and the district will obviously have to address through the budgeting process. Obviously, there are two ways to do that. You're either looking for ways to enhance revenues, or you're looking to cut expenditures. So that is something that we would have to address if we get to FY20, and that is the board's desire is to try and fully fund that Sherman-Durgis allocation. And then going out in future years, you can see the impact of that, how that grows. When you get out to FY '23, it goes down a little bit, and some of that is a function of that TIF expiring and starting to see some of the revenue associated with that. So there are some factors that are interplaying within the budget and the model that impact that overall operating budget for the fiscal year. So you can see at the bottom that the overall fund balance obviously declines as that happens. We also, the last chart I'll show you is kind of a visual of that. The purpose of this chart shows the red line is the current, is the fund balance. And then the green line is at 20%, 25% minimum fund balance per the board policy. That number continues to grow as revenue grows. It's 25% of your operating revenues. So as our operating revenues go up, that line does continue to grow. If we're spending on fund balance and being in a negative budget situation, which we know we won't be, we obviously have to take some action, but you'll see that our fund balance starts dipping below the 25% in 2020 and grows over time. Purple line is just the low point. Obviously, if fund balance gets low, then we start to hit a negative situation with our low point at that point in time of the year. So this chart is just kind of summarizes the overall, the chart we showed before with all the numbers as projected. And again, as Dr. Schuler mentioned, this is obviously the first blush 30,000 foot level with the assumptions and putting in some information that obviously will change as we move forward, and obviously the district will continue to monitor that. With that, hopefully I didn't go through that too quickly. Any questions the board may have?
I have a few. Special ed, the tuition, that's still on the rise, the number of students that are going out, or are we finding more creative? I know, weren't we doing something with West Chicago where we are doing like a cooperative to help with some of that?
Yes, we are. Right now, we do have 20 seats, and West Chicago has 10 seats, and it's through Ombudsman. Chance Light is the organization. However, the way we're paying for tuition counts the same as though it's a private pay option. So,
when is our contract up with for transportation?
You have one more year.
Okay, and then I just want to make sure I'm understanding the projections with Sherman Durgis. So if I'm reading this correctly, we would either need to find about $4 million in revenue every year, or plan on $4 million less in spending if we're going to fund that.
Or a combination of both.
Or a combination of both, okay.
Can we come back to that first question, just because I want to make sure that the actual spending around special ed tuition, has that continued to rise? I didn't think that it did for this year.
Last year we came in under budget, but it did rise a little bit, but not as bad as
It's kind of leveled off a bit.
Yeah.
Was. And number-wise, Joanne, we're pretty consistent.
right, I was going to say, the number of our students has pretty much stayed the same from year to year. It just depends on the placement of where the students are. So there's variance between the dollar amounts for the cost of tuition based on the placements, if that makes sense. So, from year to year, the number of students can pretty much remain the same, but depending on where they're attending, could have that influx or the increase.
And so then, as a district, are we looking, I'm sure we're constantly at ways that we can be keeping our students with us?
We do have a system in place every year where we're taking a look at our students, where they're placed, how they're doing, and if there's any ways in which we have some commonalities between students and potentially bringing them back, or even looking at other facilities that we can potentially kind of move them to together, just to have a cohort of our students, but we do look annually.
And then one more last question. Is the transportation for that is reimbursed state, federal, combination of both for our special ed transportation? 'Cause I know that
only
that's
state.
only state.
Correct. That's about $3.5 million.
Gets off the financial piece, but the one comment on that, just your point, I would suggest or tell you that the acuity of need for students has increased significantly. So the fact that candidly our outplacement numbers have remained consistent
tells you that our staff have worked hard to provide opportunities for students in-house. I don't know how to quantify that, but I can just tell you both within District 200 and what I hear from districts surrounding us is the student need has changed significantly. Our staff are responding to student need and behavior in ways that they have not had to prior. I mean, not that there weren't needs, but it is on the rise without a doubt.
Bill, on page 12, under the O&M capital renewal budget line, you made mention that it's 3.2 for FY19, and right, that's over 2.4 right now, correct? Is that a fair
Yes.
statement? So, you talked about increases on all the other elements there. Is that staying flat at 3.2, or are we increasing that 25% per year to keep pace?
The 3.2 will become the 7.3 in fiscal year 20. So we'll be going from 3,200,000 up to 7.3 million. And then every year out beyond that is another 3,000. So it's 7.6, 7.9, 8.2 now.
So that's based on the Sherman Burgess calculation,
Correct.
which is, so in the next agenda item, we're going to talk about this capital plan. Those are totally separate numbers, not connected to what Sherman Burgess is projecting. And fiscal year 2020 is the budget cycle we would start a year from now, right? Let's get those fiscal years mixed up.
Fiscal year 19.
Any other questions or comments for Bill?
So what's the next step in the process? Just refresh my memory. For the board.
Around the development of the budget,
Yeah.
Bill, do you want to kind of walk through your budget timeline?
Sure. We will start, we will start obviously working with departments and schools here in the next month to start getting the budgets going. We will, I think we'll bring to the board, we'll start to see here in the spring or late spring, start to see some of the budget factors or budget benchmarks that we want the board to be aware of as we move into the full budget process. By June and July, we'll have the posted budget. We'll ask the board to post the budget in July, public hearing in August, and then approval in September. It's been the normal process, but we'll definitely be keeping the board apprised as we move through the budget process for FY19, from everything on the revenue side to expenditure side. I know we still have some discussion on some of those revenue items that the board is actively talking about, and obviously the finance committee will be vetting all that as well.
Anyone else? I want to express my appreciation to Jim Gambiani and Jim Matheson in absence for their work and help in preparing this presentation. Dr. Schuler?
Sure. So the second item on the agenda, which again I think relates directly to the picture that you just saw. Two things that we included in the agenda item review. One was the facility goal that you approved earlier this year that really kind of mapped out the steps that we're going to take this year. And I guess just one for, okay?
Nasty paper cut.
Okay.
That's a Geico commercial.
We don't want, no insurance claims down there.
That number just went up.
Occupational hazard.
As you go through the facility goal for this year, I think one in a positive sense, I want to compliment the board that you are absolutely on target in terms of addressing at least two of the three elements that we set out to address this year. Develop a plan around early learning center, solution for early learning center,
and I think we certainly are on target in terms of our exploration around that. The secure entries, we certainly are on target in terms of our exploration around that. Really, there's one final item at the bottom of the second page, and that's really where we've got to begin to turn our attention now, which is what do we do to address the needs in the capital improvement plan. So when the board kind of posts the referendum, kind of reprioritize what do you want to turn your attention to first, there were 3 items. Early learning, secure entries, and the capital improvement plan, which was obviously a pretty significant part of the last referendum question. And so, again, just from a timing perspective, I think we were kind of on target in terms of the timeline that we mapped out for being able to address and turn our attention to it, but that's really where we've got to begin to focus our attention now. And so in the document, again, it's very, very small print, but in the capital improvement plan that you have, where what I'll kind of call your attention to, just so you can kind of put it next to the budget projection document. I think Brad mentioned in the last discussion, he was absolutely right. Sherman-Durgis is a financial projection tool, right? It was not developed specifically to address the absolute needs in the capital improvement plan. It was really it is a financial forecasting tool based on a set of variables that have to do with age, value of our buildings, portion of the building that needs to be replaced over time, right? That's kind of intended to serve as a complement to the budget planning process. This document gives you the year by year what will likely need to be fixed as we move across both the condition 1 and the condition 2 items. And so as you look across the top, on that very top kind of black bar, what you'll see is that in the condition 1, year 1, kind of portion of this plan, there's $8.377 million worth of priority identified in year 1. Good news is we are taking care of all of that, or we propose to take care of all of that between the combination of the Early Learning Center improvement and then the other $3.2 million that we've prioritized and you've already begun to approve for summer 18 work. So again, the North Chiller, some of those pieces, that is that 8.377 in aggregate. So again, as you kind of align need with year in the projections, your fiscal 19 budget, your budget year that you're getting ready to enter into, aligns with condition 1, year 1 in this report. Does that make sense, just in terms of budget planning with kind of condition 1, year 1? So again, as you look out to your fiscal 20 year, that's the year that in the projection model, we've assumed a ramp up to $7.3 million via the Sherman-Durgis. Now, the corresponding capital improvement number in this plan is $7.47 million. Right? That's how you can kind of correspond them. So in that particular case, the numbers are relatively close, but again, that's really kind of incidental. It's just in the way they've mapped out. But obviously, as you look to condition 1, year 3, that's where we run into a $27 million chunk. And again, in the model, your funding would have ramped up by $300,000. So you'd be at, in essence, $7.6 million in budgeted expenditures, but you're obviously staring at a much larger number in terms of need. And then as we get out into year 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 in the plan, those are the condition 2 items. So those were the 4 to 8 year items. What you'll notice across the top is that the projects identified have been kind of evenly distributed across the 5 years, that 4 to 8 year span. our assumption in the way that we're kind of going about looking at this now is that as you get closer, we're gonna have to do some reprioritizing of kind of condition and need, but just as the facility committee looked at this a while back, they just kind of distributed those costs across the 5 years in essence of the plan. Right? But the challenge, right, so clearly make no mistake, the challenge is that we've got to look at the financial forecast, which is, and obviously in order to address the numbers in the financial forecast, we'd have to make some pretty significant shifts in the budget, either on the revenue or the expenditure side. But I think important to kind of map that with the projected need, and the bottom line is that even if we simply make the adjustments on the expenditure side, in order to build that structurally into the budget, we're still gonna have a major gap in terms of project need versus, what you would potentially be funding.
So when I look at year 3, condition 1, I see Bauer and Washington are a huge chunk. What does that encompass? Like, are those some things that we're just anticipating, but we may get another year or 2 out of, or are those things that we must do? Because they're, when you put the two of those things, the two of them together, that's over 7 million of that.
Yeah, so I would suggest to you that your condition 1 stuff is stuff we know.
We know, okay.
Right now, could you possibly get another year out of an individual element kind of within that structure?
What are they? I'm just curious, because they're just so significantly higher than the other schools.
So if you go down to the schools, so we go down, now as you read down, as you go down to Bauer.
Yeah.
And look across the condition 1, year 3.
Yeah.
You'll see that a big chunk of it is the roof. So
okay.
$2.2 million is the roof. You got a little over $1 million in electrical need, about $600,000 in ceilings and lights. So that gives you the general category of where those items fall. Again, I do want to remind you that if you really dive into the detail of the capital improvement report, every one of those projects is spelled out. So, that for the purpose of this summary, kind of all of the items that are associated with roof have been kind of pulled together or lumped together under one piece, but that may in fact be several areas of the roof that have been identified and are identified in the plan.
It's roofing for everything. It seems like it's driving what's happening.
Lowell's another big chunk.
Yeah, I just saw that on there. I missed that. It was almost 4 million.
So for the current year, I'm pretty sure I know the answer, we're showing 8.3. We're taking 5.2 out of that because of the work that's in that first number that we don't have to do in Lincoln.
Sure.
And the rest of that is the capital work. The secure entrance work that we're talking about is separate, and that's the $1 million that we're seeing in this other chart that we're pulling out fund balance, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so you are just between this report and secure entry, you're projecting a little bit over 9, so almost $9.3 million. That's a combination of fund balance applied to the early learning project, $3.2 million that you're going to have budgeted for next year, as well as the $1 million that we've earmarked for secure entries.
So in other words, $27 million is beyond cuttable without drastic measures. So how, we would need to figure out here another revenue option, obviously, because the money that we would be putting away for Sherman Durgis would not be enough to cover the severity of.
Yeah, and that is what I wanted to illustrate for you is that that last line in your facilities goal. This is the challenge, right? I mean, so just trying to bring clarity to what does that mean, Chris, you're right. It's likely a combination of exploration of revenue, expenditure, certainly would have to be, but could be a reprioritization of some of this and simply saying, yeah, we're staring at $27 million, but we're not gonna do $27 million. We're gonna live on the borrow for more time. I mean, there are any number of solutions, but just that's the clarity I'm trying to bring to the challenge that we're bringing together.
So can I just throw one thing out? And I'm gonna throw this to Rob and Brad. I mean, is $27 million of work in 1 year even feasible?
What do you think, Rob?
I want to defer to my.
It's like, I would be surprised if we could do that in one
I
summer.
just wanna understand that too, is
I
that?
mean, that's a you're not gonna do that in summer. So if you look at the work that would make up that 27 million, you have to do it in the summer. But you can't. I mean, you can't spend $27 million in 10 weeks.
Let's do that.
So, yeah, so one of the things that may make sense for us in a year or two is to, once we get past year 1, year 2, maybe a little bit before the end of that, is to kind of reassess, those conditions and see if we can thin them out a little bit over time to see if those next year's critical condition year 1s are still critical. Can we push it off? I mean, that's just deferring more, but, other than trying to find a windfall of $27 million and trying to figure out how to do it, that might be another alternative, is to reassess.
Is it fair to say that we're constantly assessing the roofs and everything to determine whether we can make any adjustments to the life expectancies here?
Fair to say.
And I do want to just share for context as well, this very challenge that we're talking about. This has been kind of a study topic or discussion topic with our Citizens Advisory Committee this year. So we have been looking at this challenge, beginning to explore with them the various options for addressing it. So again, I think there are, at a couple of the more recent board meetings, a couple of comments offered in public comment, kind of suggesting that, post the referendum, we had all this stuff and now we're just pretending like we don't have all this stuff. That's not the case. It simply is a matter of how we've chosen to now prioritize and break things apart in addressing it. But this challenge we knew was coming. We knew it was the third phase, and at least on the administrative side and with the advisory committee, we have begun a lot of discussion around kind of exploration of the options. And so I do think that committee has done some good work in analyzing some of these options. And again, as we said to them at the get-go, that committee is not a recommending body to you. They know they're not providing a recommendation, but I think they will be prepared to provide some feedback on kind of how they perhaps see this challenge from the community perspective.
Can we get their minutes again? I know we got them last year, but I don't think we've received any this year. We can get their minutes. I'd be curious to see what they're talking about.
Are those those?
Not CAC, I don't know that the minutes are posted. I mean, certainly within the committee they are, but yeah.
And do we have a board member attending all those meetings? I know Brad had a few of them for us in the fall, but are we continuing to have people attend those?
Yeah, Jim Matheson attended one in January. We didn't have a board member attend. No, Jim attended the board in December.
We
We didn't have one
first
board member at the
first
last
three.
January.
November.
But Jen and I talked about it this morning. Either Jenna or I will attend the one in February. This may be overwhelming, but are there any comments or questions?
Well, go ahead. I have a thought. I guess it's a comment, maybe not a question. But, I think coming out of the referendum last spring, some of our community might have been thinking they were going to make all kinds of cuts quickly and readjust things. And I think another part of our community probably felt like we would never do that anyway. So, and I think we've got 4 things that are kind of working separately but together. We've got our 5-year financial forecast. We've got our citizens committee studying kind of all these things together. We've got our facility plans and the challenges there. We've got the finance committee and working through our debt structure and, you know, the vertical bars and the drop off and refinancing and all that stuff. I would like to see, I think it would be very valuable to our community for us to kind of integrate all that into a plan that we kind of publicize, a 5-year kind of integrated facility finance investment plan that, you know, we can kind of, I'm imagining something that we brand as some kind of financial, 5-year financial forecast to deal with all these issues so that we can, you know, promote out to the community that we've got a plan. And it's on our website, it has its own webpage that ties all these things together, because I think, you know, even for all of us who've been on board, it's really complicated. So how we, maybe it's a community engagement thing, is how we push that out. But I would love to see all this stuff wrapped up together into one kind of integrated plan that gets branded and it says this is a District 200 plan on how to deal with this the next 5 years. And it'd be very clear about challenges and the options that are ahead of us. And that's why I like what the Citizens Advisory Committee has done, is they've tackled some of those issues. So
They've got to tackle some of those issues. They've tackled all of those issues. So, Brad may not have said it clearly. I think you articulated exactly what I'm saying is that's the need of the board to do that. Now, there's a secondary element to, you know, once you have arrived at what you determine might be the best solution for the community, obviously you've got to communicate that out, but this deals with all of those pieces combined.
yeah. But that's embedded in the facilities work plan, right? That idea? Sorry.
Yes.
That's the November through March, the last column on the facilities work
Yes.
plan. Yeah, I agree. I just think there's great opportunity for us to do something to kind of pull this stuff all together and then kind of put it out as one integrated package that I don't know that I've seen as, I can picture what it would look like and how we would communicate it. I don't know that I've seen that in that integrated fashion as opposed to some like spreadsheets and PowerPoints. So I just think there's an opportunity. I'd like to just kind of put a stake in it, and then I'd love to see something like that.
And Dr. Schuler, when do we expect the Community Action Committee to tender the recommendations, or not the recommendations, but the vision?
I think as of their last meeting, they've really kind of wrapped up their conversation around this. I think we've got one kind of follow-up conversation with them, you know, just related to a little bit of what I think Brad was just asking about, which was kind of the how do you try to communicate all of, you know, this information. So, you know, again, even, you know, many folks that are on that committee have been on for multiple years, and they spent a lot of time kind of trying to understand all of this information, as you obviously as a board, you know, have done as well. But I guess in terms of their substantive conversation around this, they have spent, I guess, almost 5 months on the topic. So I think they've kind of exhausted the conversation in terms of how they see it.
So can you imagine when they make their kind of summary of the year, that's a recommendation to the board? They don't make recommendations?
No, they don't. It's feedback. And I think they've kind of tapped it around. Here's our feedback to the board. And again, Brad, I don't know that it needs to wait to the end of the year. You know, we really, again, try to kind of align the conversation so that, again, you have that as one source of input with all of this conversation when you were at the point collectively that you're really ready to take that on. And again, I think kind of the combination of the 5-year projections and what we know in this challenge, at least to me, would suggest that we are kind of at that point where that's the next conversation that we've got to turn to. We obviously get a couple of more steps to work through in the discussions around early learning and secure entry, but I think it's time for us to shift the conversation there as well.
Bill, just to be clear though, to follow up with Dr. Schuler here, the facilities number we're speaking about, this 27 million need, that is not in the forecast 5, is that a fair statement?
Correct.
So that red number gets real red.
The numbers that are in here are only Sherman Durgis projections.
Yeah, so I think just to put a fine point to that, Jim, if you go out, so year 3, where you're staring at $27 million, year 3 equates to FY 2021, where you, at that point, will have projected $7.6 million via Sherman Durgis. But again, absent any reprioritizing, you're forecasting 7.6 with a $4 million deficit, but a $27 million need, so, yes.
So even if we fund the full 7 million or 7.3 that year, we're still gonna be 20 million short. So the likelihood of us finding 20 million just for that 1 year is very unlikely.
Right. But I think you raised a good point, that even if we had the money, we couldn't do it all in one summer, so they'll have to tweak this a little bit. You guys are doing a great job on it, it's gonna help us do our job at the finance committee as well, so.
Good job, guys. Any other comments, questions? If not, I can't believe this, we're moving to public comments, right? The opportunity to speak to the board is provided for members of the public who have a question or comment on an agenda item. The board appreciates hearing from stakeholders and values your thoughts and questions. The board strives to make the best decisions for the district, and public input from a variety of venues is very helpful. The board must protect the civility and decorum of this meeting. Please be respectful for the duties of the board and the democratic process in your comments tonight. Please use the microphone, state your name, and whether you're a resident of the district, and address your comments to the board. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Please be factual and courteous, and do not include statements that are personally disrespectful or condescending to members of the board or staff. If you feel your matter needs to be discussed in more detail, please attend the board's chance to chat or present your comments to us in writing. Mr. Lantz, I think, is pretty familiar with those instructions, so Mr. Lantz is the only one that signed up for public comments. Carol?
Yes, Harold Lantz, and I do live in the district. I just want to make a quick comment regarding budgeting and forecast. I know I guess it's got to be 6 months or so ago, we spent money for a consultant to come back with donations or making contributions to help like offset the, like a Jefferson or naming rights, whatever it might be. We never heard anything back, regarding, after we're spending all that money, we haven't heard anything back about any kind of progress, or are we going down that route anymore, to go outside and try to get contributions or donations to help offset some of these capital needs that we have? That's my only comment.
There being no further actions to come before the board in open session, I ask for a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. Moved by Mr. Paulson, seconded by Mr. Erickson. Mr. Hutchinson, please call. Oh, I can call. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I hear none opposed. This meeting is adjourned.